Let me suggest to you the most worrisome thing I see in the Trump constituency is it is the exact opposite of that. It is fiscally liberal and socially conservative. And I think that might be the larger constituency out there. If you look at those rural voters, not just rural, but that's the prototype of Trump voters, they want every government benefit, every disability benefit, every entitlement check that could possibly be coming their way. It is not lost on me that Trump does not talk at all about the debt or the deficit or entitlement reform. All of that is completely off the table. And yet, a lot of that constituency has become more conservative. I mean, that's where you're in states where you're finding abortion bans, where the trans issue is particularly hot, et cetera, et cetera. So I worry that socially liberal, fiscally conservative voter that you and I are both looking for, I worry that that is a minority voter compared to the exact opposite.
So is Colorado politics changing to a whole new system? But first, subscribe and like our channel. Click that little bell icon for notifications. And you can find the Devil's Advocate podcast on your favorite listening app. You know him, you love him, Eric Sondermann, who I know was a big Trump supporter. Why did you support him so much?
Well, the first time or, on the sixth or seventh ballot I cast, I tried to just cast as many ballots as I could, John, because I was all in with our incoming president.
You weren't surprised by his victory. I mean, I was surprised by the magnitude of it, but were you surprised?
I was surprised a little bit. I was certainly surprised by the magnitude of it. On election night, Virginia was, to use poker terms, Virginia was the tell to me, because Virginia, in many respects, is a similar state to Colorado, was a red state, has gone through the purple evolution to now being a rather blue state, maybe not quite as blue as Colorado is, but close. And its polls closed early on that Tuesday. And as I saw those numbers coming in, and yes, Harris won the state, but she didn't win it by the 8 or 10 points you would expect. She ended up winning it by, 2 point something, maybe 3. And that was the tell to me that this was going to be a big night for Republicans and a big night for Trump.
I had heard that Harris did not outperform Joe Biden from 4 years earlier in a single county across the nation. That on every county level, that she either won or lost by smaller numbers than Biden did, which for me is just mind-blowing. And you have not been kind to Mr. Trump, which means he's read your columns. You might be the first in the re-education camps. So, yeah. What does it tell you about the mood? What does it tell you about just the excitement? And even, let me put it this way, the panic over Trump right now is not the same panic we saw in 2016. People almost seem to have, are taking it in stride. In fact, his numbers for the first time ever are above water.
Yeah, I don't sense the same kind of panic now. I sense more on the Democratic side of the aisle. I tend to walk more the middle side, but on the Democratic side of the aisle, I just sense a resignation and a depression. I mean, there's no active resistance movement. Yeah, there are columns being written about resist this way or resist that way, but there's no active resistance movement. I sort of equate what the Democrats are going through to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of dying. And I don't know what stage they're in now. A couple of weeks ago was very much an anger stage, and I caught a little bit of that on my own social media. But I don't know if they're at full-blown acceptance now, but they're somewhere on that continuum.
I've used the exact same example for the Colorado Republican Party, the 5 stages of grief. And so many Republicans just can't accept it's dead. I mean, it's gone. Grandma is not here with us any longer. Something will replace it, but what you knew as the Republican Party simply does not exist and will not in the next 4, 6, 8 years have any substantial victories in suburban areas, maybe in other areas, but I don't see that the Republican name is going to get rehabbed in Colorado in those female-dominated suburban areas while Trump is in office. What do you think?
Certainly not while Trump is in office. There are some smart people on the Republican side of the aisle around Colorado that I talk to and tell me it's not even going to get rehabilitated after Trump is out of office. As long as Trump is alive and breathing and exerting control over the Republican Party in one form or another, they are dubious. The question is this a reaction to Donald Trump or is it a reaction to Trumpism? And I think it is probably some of both in Colorado. And as long as Trumpism is the name of the day, and as long as the poster children or the poster people for the Colorado Republican Party, and I'm thinking of the Lauren Boeberts, and I'm thinking of the Dave Williams and people like that, as long as the poster children are ultimately Trumpy, or in some cases even crazier than Trump, your prediction is on safe ground.
That part, let's dive into that for a second. The Dave Williams party is so dysfunctional that when the National Committee wants to send money to a candidate here, they don't send it to the Colorado Republican Party for fear it's going to get misused. They sent it to Arizona's GOP to run ads in our congressional districts. I've never seen that in all my time in politics. But it really shows you the lack of trust and how out of step that party is. The state party. While nationally Republicans are riding high, I don't see an easy rehabilitation for the Colorado GOP.
I don't either. I mean, it was going to take a national mood change of major proportions. And I'm not even sure that mood change. And I do think there will predictably be some Trump overreach. I think there'll be a reaction to that overreach. I don't think it is far-fetched to think that Democrats may get control of the U.S. House 2 years from now in that off year. Senate's going to be much tougher. The Senate's likely to get more Republican before it gets less Republican. But the House may well flip in 2 years. But you have a hard time imagining what is going to dislodge a Brittany Pedersen or a Jason Crow or a whole lot of legislative Democrats who are sitting on districts that ordinarily ought to be swing districts, but in this particular environment are ultimately safe. I mean, Colorado has become such a blue state. I ran the numbers after the election, and I think there are only 9 states in the country where Kamala Harris got a higher percentage of the vote than she did in Colorado. I mean, Kamala Harris, Colorado outperformed Kamala Harris, New York.
Oh, it's up there. That one says it all.
Yeah.
If you say that again, because I want to hear it
I believe
again.
that's right. I hope I don't have to come on and do a clarification. But the only states out of our 50 where Harris outperformed what she did in Colorado were, if I have it right, Hawaii, predictably, the 3 West Coast states, California, Oregon, Washington, Illinois, Massachusetts, and Vermont, maybe one other New England state. But there were very few states that are more blue now than Colorado.
For me, when it really hit, kind of that emotional hits, like we're not the same, was I'm a target shooter. I like shooting sports, and I go through the ads on to buy this or to buy that, and often on the gun or magazine you're looking at, there's a little asterisk that says not available in California or Massachusetts. That was just a common thing for years, and now it's not available in California, Massachusetts, or Colorado.
There you go.
And I was like, oh my God, I never thought that would happen to this Western state, but it's a sign. Let's go to the opposite side. I mean, we can go talk about Republican dysfunction all day long. I don't think it matters because even though the Republicans now have don't have a super minority, as if this was the big victory. And by the way, congratulations to the Republicans for getting out of the super minority in the state
Oh,
house.
you talk about a low bar. If,
Yeah.
if that constitutes a victory, that we're not outnumbered 2-1.
Yeah, but they're grasping for anything that
Right.
smells like victory, and
Right.
that was victory. So, good God, I hope Polis vetoes something that they can't override. But there's not a lot of talk about how crazed and out of step the left is in Colorado. That while they hate Trump and things like, when Dave Williams puts out a thing, burn gay pride flags, it's just, all right, it's cringeworthy. But the other stuff, I think, is starting to become cringeworthy on the left. Not just the crazy things from, Representative Epps or Hernandez, who are no longer in office, but the policies that are getting so out of control that businesses can't do business. And I'm thinking we're going to start seeing a lot of that turn into tougher economic times here.
Well, I think we're already seeing that 2025 is going to be year of budget cutting, and all the powers that be at all levels, whether it's Jared Polis and others at the state level, or Mike Johnston and other local government officials around the metro area, everyone is pleading poverty. Now, my take on that is twofold. One, yes, the economy is cool, but it's only cooled somewhat. The economy is still ticking along quite nicely, thank you, in terms of tax revenues. The bigger factor is, finally, 4 or 5 years later, all of the federal COVID relief money is at long last. I didn't know it was still around 4 or 5 years later, but I guess it was continuing to trickle. And now that trickle has dried up. And so now, since so many government agencies, and I'm sounding probably more Republican than I really am right now.
Come to the dark side.
But since so many of these agencies started building those revenues and those resulting expenditures into their base, now when they're gone, and it was, of course, predictable that they were going to be gone. These were not forever kinds of grants, forever allocations. They were in a public health emergency, and I'm surprised that they lasted as long as they did. But now, of course, the whole public sector is pleading poverty.
You can't be surprised by this at all. Reagan once said there's nothing closer to immortality than a new government program.
Exactly.
And whenever government spends $1, that means they're obligated to spend $1.05 next year. It doesn't matter what it is. I look at the bloat of Polis's administrative state, and I think the untold story of the Polis years will be how the regulatory state took over Colorado, from changing things from councils to commissions, which give them huge power, like the Clean Air Commission. I forget what it's called. Now,
Air Quality
Council is now a commission, and they're talking about forcing employers to keep logs on how their employees get to work, and if there are not enough of them on buses, well, then you're going to pay. It's out of control. I think, as much as the Colorado Republican Party is out of step with Colorado, the Colorado Democratic establishment is also out of step with the mainstream in Colorado, particularly when it comes to taxes, regulations, and I'll even say woke stuff.
Yeah, I think there clearly was a reaction, maybe less so in Colorado than around the country, but the woke excesses, and we all know what we're talking about. But
but you can't describe it, otherwise you'll be a hater and a racist.
Exactly. But the woke excesses clearly took a toll. They're not the reason solely that Kamala Harris got beat rather convincingly, but they were certainly on the list of the top 3 or 4 reasons that voters were rebelling against. As to whether Colorado is really going to turn, I don't know. I mean, to go to a state 800 miles east, I'll travel to Missouri and steal their slogan, which is "Show me."
Right.
And in terms of when Republicans are going to start winning some of those suburban elections in Colorado,
let's turn the tables.
It's show me.
Let's, instead of looking at it from R&D, look at it from that swing voter. For the first time ever, half of Colorado's voters are unaffiliated. They're independents. And I'm thinking, in my mind, I think the person who decides which way Colorado goes is a mother, perhaps a single mother in Jefferson County or in Douglas County, and they look at the Republican Party, they see Trump, they see anti-abortion, even though that's not always true, they see Dave Williams, and they just cringe. But on the other side, we see this woke stuff. We see the state is unaffordable to live in. Young people cannot buy a house, and they've got to go, I'm politically homeless.
And the question is, I agree with a lot of what you just laid out. The question is, when are Democrats going to really start paying a penalty for that? And yes, Democrats did some sorting in the primary election last June, and the Elizabeth Eppses and Tim Hernandezes of the world were shown the door, and hooray for that. And so the Democrats are doing a little bit of internal house cleaning. Republicans also nominated some very credible people, whether it's Jeff Hurd, not soon to be Congressman Jeff Hurd, soon to be Congressman Jeff Crank, Gabe Evans, etc. So there's some internal house cleaning going on in terms of getting rid of the wackiest voices. But I haven't yet seen, and maybe it's coming, but I haven't yet seen Democrats pay the penalty, the brand penalty that Republicans pay. I have friends, I'm sure they've been on this show, whether it's Dick Wadhams or other people, and when we sit down over lunch or a beer or whatever, and, at one point I sort of speculated that the penalty was 3 or 4 points for having an R after your name. And they jumped in and said, oh, no, take that number and double it. And it's, just having an R after your name puts you 6, 7, 8 points behind the curve before the campaign even starts. And if you're if you're in a Lauren Boebert, Colorado Congressional District 4, fine, you can survive 6, 7, 8 points of drag. But if you're in anything remotely approaching a swing district, the race is over before it starts.
Colorado's Republican Party is a regional party. In rural areas, it'll stay that way, just like Diana DeGette will keep her seat until she dies. That's not going to change.
I think she'd be able to keep it after that. I think she has that worked out, okay?
If there was ever a walking or soon rolling in a wheelchair excuse for term limits on the federal level. So we have this regional party, but in these swing districts, I've always said, if you have an R behind your name, you might as well have a swastika behind your name, because that's just the image that these suburban women have of you. So what are they supposed to do? Keep voting for economic ruin for the state, or vote for people they find cringeworthy and disgusting? And they're stuck in this way. So let me drop this out. I see a potential, not a likelihood, but a potential that Colorado becomes a truly independent state, truly unaffiliated state, that people of neither party might win some of those seats. I'm not talking for federal office. I'm talking for the state house and state senate, if there is a way for them to get to the primary.
Yeah, I think, first of all, nothing would make me happier as somebody who sort of preaches centrism, and it's not a milquetoast centrism.
Yes, it is. Have you met you?
It's not a milquetoast centrism. It's you can feel strongly about issues, but you sort of have respect for the other side. You understand where the other side is coming from. You don't demonize other people. Compromise is not necessarily a 4-letter word, and I could go on.
Quite simply, you don't hate business.
You don't hate business. I mean, the most telling part about Colorado right now to me is we have a governor who I think it is fair to say is probably more liberal, progressive, whatever word you want to use, than any governor we've had in at least modern Colorado history.
Without a doubt.
I can't go back in the history books under 50 years. But short of that, the most liberal, progressive governor we've had, Boulder, Colorado, all the rest. And yet, most business audiences regard him as the backstop. They regard him as the sane one. They regard him as the savior at the moment, because his veto pen, even though it's only exercised sparingly,
and symbolically, mostly.
And sometimes symbolically, but his veto pen is all that is keeping a lot of those business interests, chamber kinds of interests, from facing a far worse fate. And the fact that Jared Polis is the backstop, is the savior, is quite popular these days in a lot of conservative circles, tells you a lot about where the Democratic Party has shifted in this state.
It'll be interesting this year. As you know, Colorado for 80 years has had peace between labor and business with the Labor Peace Act. And I get a lot of stuff from my colleagues across the country. Caldara, why aren't you, doing right to work in Colorado? It's like, because we have this peace here. We have something that neither side likes, but it's been a truce that's been holding. That truce, I think, is going to break this year if the legislature destroys that Labor Peace Act and makes it easier for private sector unions to not only organize but to coerce funds from employees. That happens, it's going to be a huge hit to the state. I don't know if Polis can stand up to his left enough to veto such a thing.
I don't know that he can, but I also don't know that he can't. I mean, Jared Polis has the advantage of being a self-funder. He didn't take a ton of money from all these constituency groups to get into office. We'll see if he has future ambitions that he needs to keep those alive.
He does, and we all know
apparently
it.
does, although some of, if you look at a few of his recent tweets, they would indicate he's trying to play a different lane in maybe a coming Democratic Party, more of a libertarian lane. I'm never quite sure what lane Jared is
I laugh every time he's called libertarian.
But the RFK stuff or whatever, Polis, every once in a while he needs to show his independent streak. So I don't know that Polis does not have the stomach for a veto or the political backbone for a veto. We'll see. I guess my critique of what the Democrats are doing or threatening to do with the Labor Peace Act, I boil a lot of politics down these days into a 3-word slogan, which is because we can. 3 words, because we can. What is the predicate that Democrats have laid for why we need to change the Labor Peace Act, for why what we've had for the last you said 80 years is not working? How is it broken? Where's the predicate for how it is broken? Now, the same can be true for a lot of what's going to come out of the Trump White House, which is, why are we doing this? Because we can. Democrats are in control in the state. Democrats are beholden, way too beholden in my estimation, to a lot of union interests, and they're going to force it because we can.
I see that on policy after policy after policy. And the idea that Polis is the backstop I find entertaining, since his administrative state and the truly whack jobs he is putting into these commissions to oversee business and to regulate business. When you have crazed vegan activists on top of your veterinarian board and your ag boards, you know something when you have huge anti-fossil fuel zealots on top of the Energy Commission. You know what's going on here.
The way they have dug in on the wolf thing. I mean, if you put that back on the ballot, we could only hope it would go down by a significant number. I think there is substantial voter regret. We live most of the year these days up in Grand County, and where it's become the epicenter of the wolf reintroduction and the predation and all the rest. But yet Polis, and I think we probably know some of the reasons behind that, but Polis just has doubled down on this whole failed experiment.
What are some of those reasons behind it?
I think we know what those reasons are. I think it's who the governor goes home to at night.
Ah, there we go. We can say it. He's married to a vegan activist, animal rights crazed guy. And I think that shows through in a lot of these policies. Politics always is local, and there's nothing more local than his husband. The fact that the ban on lion hunting went down so dramatically, that was all regret over the wolves.
It was all regret over the wolves. And ditto in Denver, liberal Denver, that didn't even closely consider the fur ban or the slaughterhouse ban or whatever. I think finally the voters have said, maybe we're not going to do biology at the ballot box.
So it goes back to what I'm saying. I see this path.
I hear you.
For I'm going to say the term "Save Colorado," but you know what I'm saying, that we can bring reasonable business reform back, that we can let businesses be businesses. We can stop giving special interest tax breaks to every everybody that has Polis's ear. We can stop the wokeness, but it doesn't mean we have to go full Trump in this state, because I can't see it. The problem is, if unaffiliateds get into the general election, which they can petition on, then there's a three-way race, really. If there's a popular unaffiliated, I don't see my vision happening unless we have some sort of jungle primary, something where an unaffiliated independent candidate can go all the way to the general and face one candidate.
Totally agree with you. The most consequential part of the election a couple months ago in Colorado was Proposition 131, more so than some changes in the congressional delegation, more so than whether the Republicans were going to be in a super minority or any of that stuff. Prop 131, which, it looked like it was polling in safe ground, and then the bottom fell out of it at the end. Change is scary, change is hard, and this was pretty major change introduced all at once, and maybe it was too much to swallow, shall we say.
It was a rare loss for Kent Thiry, who's
an
amazing guy.
And he had passed, redistricting reform. Prior to that, he had passed allowing unaffiliated to vote in primaries, make it much easier for them to vote in primaries. And by and large, I think his previous reforms have been proven to be positive, to work out, to be an improvement over what was before. The jungle primary, where yes, you can run with an R after your name or a D after your name, but you don't run exclusively in a Republican primary or a Democratic primary. You run in an all-comers kind of primary, and then the top, in the case of that proposition, the top four finishers would have advanced. In that kind of a scenario, yes, there's a case to be made for how centrist, unaffiliated types can thrive. The problem is, in the current formulation, yes, as an unaffiliated voter, which I've been for 25 years, I could put my name on the ballot with the unaffiliated after my name. But there are two problems. There's a Republican funding machine out there. There's a Democratic funding machine out there. There's no substantial funding machine for independents and unaffiliateds. So now that politics has become so pricey and so expensive, how do you compete?
Let me dig on that for a second. All right, let's say we wave the magic wand and we have jungle primaries, and I think people would pass this. A jungle primary and the top two battle out. So it's not ranked choice voting or anything else that people are not ready for yet. So let's say you have a Democrat and an independent who win the top two. It's not like the Republican Party in Colorado is shoveling a lot of money into Republicans these days. And in fact, if that turns out to be the case and there's a Democrat and an unaffiliated and independent who is more pro-business, couldn't the Republican Party still help that guy?
And what you're saying is very akin to what California has now.
Right.
Which is, they just call it a top two system.
And Republicans have made some advances.
And Republicans have made some advances. Now, I know the reason Kemp Thiry and others didn't go in that direction was they thought it was subject to some abuse. As we saw, I believe, with Adam Schiff, who's going to be the next senator, Donald Trump's favorite incoming U.S. senator, said tongue-in-cheek, who I think his interests funneled a lot of money to defeat another viable Democrat, Katie Porter, in the primary in favor of a Republican, Steve Garvey, the old baseball player who was a no-hope guy, was never going to be a serious competition in November. So yes, you can manipulate this, but Lord knows the current system is subject to plenty of manipulation. So I would be all in favor of a California kind of top two. And the effect it would have, it's not going to turn a Republican district into a Democratic district or a Democratic district into a Republican district, but it might dial back on the extremism on both sides of the aisle. In a hardcore Republican district, yes, we still may elect a Republican or we may elect a conservative-minded independent, but it's not going to be a fringe type. And ditto, and maybe even more importantly, on the left, Democratic districts are still going to elect a Democrat or a left-leaning independent, but it's not going to be crazy land.
All right, so you see it as calming the extremes. I see it a little differently.
Okay.
I see that Colorado has, and I hate to say it this way, a libertarian-ish theme to it. It always has. And thank God people don't know the word because it would scare them. But these people who we're talking about, they're not anti-abortion, they're not anti-gay, they're not anti-weed, they're environmentalists, but they're not pro-tax, they're not pro-debt, they're not pro-regulation. There is a libertarian-ish vibe there. And if there was an alternative, I think a lot of those suburbanites in these swing districts would take that. And I see that growing so fast in Colorado that if we had a way for that final two, we would see unaffiliated independents winning in Colorado, which means in that legislature, the left and right would have to try to get those votes if they wanted to pass or defeat something. I want to see that.
I want to see that as well. I think, one can only hope that the people behind Prop 131, and I believe everything I hear is this will be the case, that this was not a one and done kind of proposition, that they will bring it back, they'll change it, they'll trim their sails, they'll be a little smarter, maybe a little more limited in the scope of what they do, which is what you're proposing, get rid of the ranked choice voting and just go to the top two California-like system. Hopefully Kent Thiry and others and his compatriots have that kind of staying power. I think they modeled themselves somewhat after Douglas Bruce. I mean, let's not forget Douglas Bruce, who I know is a champion in this office place.
Yeah,
3 times, and
we have a statue. We have a statue to him upstairs. If you want to genuflect,
I'll pay homage on my way out. Let's not forget, yes, it was 3 times that Bruce brought it, but there was even one time before Douglas Bruce arrived. So it was really the 4th time that something similar was on the ballot that it finally passed.
My read of Kent Thiry, and I know him, but I don't know him as well as I'd like, is that he's going to steel himself for the next fight. I don't think this one sat well with him. And he is a remarkably, how to put it, policy-centric guy.
I agree.
I found a lot of guys who do initiatives, I like that idea, we'll do it. He gets down in the weeds on this one.
Which is both an asset and sometimes a liability. It's not a liability to get down in the weeds, and Kent Thiry very much does that. I think sometimes Thiry might be better served by being a little less out front and putting some other people out front as the quote-unquote candidate or the spokesperson or whatever. He can be a little bit of a lightning rod. But Kent Thiry is anything but a loser, and he is not going to let this issue go with an L after his name. The other thing is, Thiry is not just a Colorado player. Yes, he lives in Colorado, but he is running these kinds of initiatives around the country in states that are friendly to the initiative process. He's head of something, I think it's called Unite America. I believe I have that right. And they're looking for how do you structurally take away so many of the incentives that are built into the system we have right now that just tend to polarize and polarize and polarize.
I try to, when I talk to GOP type audiences, going to Kubler-Ross, I say there are some things you have to accept. Go ahead, be angry, be sad, try to do your deal making, but Colorado is not going to become a pro-life state. And once you accept that, Mr. and Mrs. Republican, as fact, then that opens up possibilities of how you can win. But if you lead with that, you're not going to go anywhere. If you lead with, we got to burn gay pride flags, you're not going to go anywhere. It's not that hard here. If you accept political reality, but what I see from old school Republicans is a refusal to accept political reality, that the demographics in this state has changed considerably, and this is the reality, at least for the foreseeable future, the next decade.
And it goes back to what you were talking about 2 or 3 minutes ago, John. It's the libertarian streak that I sometimes would change the framing of that and call it more of a frontier streak that is part and parcel of who and what Colorado is. And, that libertarian streak, it doesn't resonate with extreme anti-abortion ideology. It doesn't resonate with the anti-gay agenda that seems 20 years dated. That ship has sailed.
Nor does it, I think, sit with the rabid pro-abortion movement, although the state easily passed the most liberal and permissive abortion law in the nation and put it into the Constitution. So, I mean, that gives you an idea of what this state is.
I think that just speaks to the polarization we see all around us. And it speaks to the because we can psychology. Why did Democrats and reproductive rights activists and whatever put that into the Constitution? Yes, they were scared of Dobbs. Yes, they were scared of the potential of Trump reoccupying the White House. But it was mostly
because you can.
Because we can, as a way to rally the base this election. And even though abortion rights were under no meaningful attack in Colorado.
Never were, never will be.
Never were, never will be. Why be 98% secure in that when you can be 99 or 100% secure in that? But then these are the same people, and a lot of these are my friends, and I tend to, if you put a gun to my head and say, are you on the pro-choice or pro-life side, even though I tend to have a lot of asterisks, I'll pick on the pro-choice side. But these are the same people who then go lose their minds when a conservative red state, a Texas and Arkansas, run the list, also takes it too far on the other side of that issue.
The hypocrisy is outstanding. All right, so let me just see if I got the picture. If we have jungle primaries where an unaffiliated independent can get to the general and face off one person, we could see a way to go if there's funding for that person. But right now, Republicans can't fund anybody anyway, so that funding has to come through someplace else. A true believer would argue, but also the function of the party, where you have precinct captains who take care of walking their district. Whereas I don't think that happens anymore. I don't see the mechanics of that. Maybe in some conservative areas, the left has that walking down. They know how to knock on doors. Republicans, vote chasing, vote harvesting is not really there yet. And so it's going to have to be rebuilt some way. And I'd like to be built around principles more than a party, because the party doesn't work. And am I just high here?
No, you're not high. At a national level, I mean, by most accounts, the Republicans the Trump campaign had a very poor ground game in this election. And we saw that it didn't matter. When the voters are in a mood for change, nothing will get in the way of the expression of that mood. And that was the case on November 5th. Voters were in the mood for change. They were not buying what Democrats were selling. They were not buying the Biden-Harris agenda. They were not buying any piece of it. I could see in a jungle primary as well that you will have some November elections that really look like what we now have as June elections. If you had a jungle primary in this central Denver legislative district where we're taping this show, where Sean Camacho defeated Elizabeth Epps in a primary, in a top two finisher kind of thing, Sean Camacho and Elizabeth Epps probably would not have only faced off in June, they would face off again in November. Yeah. And then you don't have, presumably, all that Democratic Party money coming into play because you have two Democrats running against each other. And yes, different interest groups will pick up sides with one of them or with the other of them, but you will not have all of that party money.
Let's take the next few minutes, and when we wrap this up, to talk about a headier topic. Okay. When we talk about the polarization. I'm going to put it this way, long-winded way of doing it. When I was a kid, we had these kind of shared cultural things. If I said Lucille Ball on a conveyor belt with a bunch of chocolates, everybody knew what we were talking about. Beam me up, Scotty, everybody knew. Today, it's very fragmented culturally, and so we don't have a lot that binds us together as a frame of reference for cultural things. Politically, it seems to be the same way. We old guys remember when Republicans and Democrats would have fistfights in the legislature and then go out for a beer and have a great time. And that there was still this accepted overall thing that we are pro-business. We want to protect labor more. You don't want to protect labor more. You want to protect businesses more. But we understand business is good. That there was a shared end goal. I'm not certain that exists anymore. Now, I'm taking a lot of pleasure in Trump's victory. I just love to see the panic. I'm thrilled that a socialist isn't president. I love seeing Trump derangement on display. I live in Boulder, so I get to see it all the time. It's a beautiful form of entertainment. But this, I got to get a better word than polarization. This idea that we don't share the same cultural values of what government's supposed to do. From my point of view, government is there to protect our liberties. From a progressive's point of view, government is there to reorganize society and get rid of billionaires and give it to somebody else. Is there any solving this?
I don't know.
Or is it a problem? Let's go that way. Is that a problem?
Oh, it is a huge problem.
Why? Why is that a problem?
It is the problem of our age. You were saying you're looking for a better word than polarization. Let me suggest that word. I've not completely stopped using the word polarization, but I've de-emphasized it. I now call it what I think it is, which is tribalism. I think it is polarization, which I know Merriam-Webster said is the word of the year.
Right.
I think they're 10 years past their time. I think that was the word of 2014 or 2015. I think tribalism is where we're at now because it is polarization on steroids. We're living in completely different worlds. I take the Pledge of Allegiance with liberty and justice for all. It seems to me that no one believes in that formulation of liberty and justice. We have one party that is the Liberty Party and one party that is the Justice Party. And it's
only since the word justice has been co-opted by socialists.
Fair enough. I'm not going to argue that point. But if you see where I'm going, I often sometimes use a football metaphor here. And I think the times you're describing when you and I were a lot younger, the parties played on the 40-yard line. Democrats took up camp on the left-hand 40-yard line. Republicans were on the right-hand 40-yard line. Yes, there was 20 yards of gap in between them, but you could navigate that 20 yards sometimes. Now you have Democrats in one end zone, Republicans often in the other end zone. They don't talk to each other. They have nothing in common. There's 100 yards or more in between them, and very little gets done. But it's not just the getting done piece that bothers me. It's the understanding piece. We simply don't understand each other. And one more point, you also talk about, those old days. There's one other thing that's missing from those days as we become more tribal, which is ticket splitting, which is the notion. I flash back to 1978, showing my age. Dick Lamb, my mentor, your friend, was running for his first reelection. Popular governor. He got reelected by 60-40 vote, overwhelming vote. In that very same election, very same ballot, Bill Armstrong is running for the U.S. Senate for the first time, and he gets elected by almost an identical 60-40 margin. So you had a huge chunk of Coloradans that were splitting their ticket. Yes, I'm sending Bill Armstrong, conservative, evangelical Republican, to the U.S. Senate, and I'm sending Dick Lamb,
the guy who brought abortion to Colorado.
The guy who brought abortion to Colorado, guy who kept the Olympics out of Colorado, environmentally oriented guy, back to the State House for another 4 years. And that was just how we did it. And the same was true around the country. And now ticket splitting is gone. You're either on Team Red or Team Blue.
I don't know if that, let me challenge the term tribalism. I don't know if I disagree with you or not, so let me think it out loud. Tribalism to me has a connotation that I was born in this tribe. Right or wrong, I fight for them. Whereas I think what you're describing is an ideological split, that progressives want socialism and conservatives want this image of American greatness And we libertarians, the few of us who are out there, want government to protect our liberties. And so there's got these, I see it as a three-way football game, not a two-way. But is it possible that it's not tribalism in the sense that I was just born this way, and so I was born in this land. If I was born on that land, I'd be fighting for Israel. But it's actually that we've lost shared values so much on what the core function of government is, that now it's turning into a completely Civil War-ish phenomenon.
I'll accept your criticism of the tribalism thing in terms of it really doesn't relate to where we're born. I mean, yes, there's some, if you're born a Republican.
But how you're raised or what you're...
Yeah, so there's some correlation there, but it's not determinative. But I would suggest it is more than our view of government's role. I think it's not only an ideological piece, it is equally as much a cultural piece. And I think it's more of a cultural piece. Exactly. I think it's more of a cultural piece. And whether that's what media you watch, what books you read, what you read online in the morning, who your neighbors are, where you go to worship, if you worship at all, what your occupation is, what neighborhood you live in, where you send your kids to school, all of those we have divided red and blue.
I still think it's red, blue, and something else.
I think that's fair. Because you're a red-leaning something else.
Yeah. And you might be a blue-leaning something else.
I don't know where I lean. It depends on the day.
You're a blue meanie if you remember Yellow Submarine. Anyway, so I see on the worst side, just like during the Civil War, there was a basic conflict on the role of government culturally. Federal government should make sure everyone is treated equally. No, states' rights have the right to do this. This was a core difference. Fortunately for that war, it was mostly divided on geographic lines. Right. That's not the case. Maybe it is. Maybe it's urban
rural
versus rural. And the battlegrounds are places like I live in the burbs where I'm surrounded by the enemy. And I don't know what this Civil War looks like. And I wonder at some point if the ping-ponging of we're going to go to this crazy socialist, all right, we've had enough of that. Now we're going to go to this guy, well, we don't like his tone. I don't know
what we're playing is ping pong.
I don't know what does this Civil War look like if it keeps going this way? Play that out.
It doesn't look like 1860s America. Let's be clear about that. I mean, we're not, God forbid, picking up sides and succeeding from the Union.
You would look good with those bushy sideburns, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't look like that. We're seeing increasing political violence. I worry, the Trump assassination attempt, the other plot that they interrupted before it became real on the golf course. But it's not just that. It's members of Congress. I think we're looking at increasing random acts or seemingly random acts of political violence, but that might not even be as serious. January 6th has to be mentioned in that equation, but I think that's not even as serious as just it's not distrust we hold for each other, it's outright antipathy. And the thing that worries me the most, you talked earlier about your formulation of a socially liberal, fiscally conservative constituency. Let me leave you with, and that's always been, if only that constituency could really find a voice and a foothold. Find a home.
People like that are politically homeless.
Let me suggest to you the most worrisome thing I see in the Trump constituency is it is the exact opposite of that. It is fiscally liberal and socially conservative. And I think that might be the larger constituency out there. If you look at those rural voters, not just rural, but that's the prototype of Trump voters, they want every government benefit, every disability benefit, every entitlement check that could possibly be coming their way. It is not lost on me that Trump does not talk at all about the debt or the deficit or entitlement reform. All of that is completely off the table. And yet a lot of that constituency has become more conservative. I mean, that's where you're in states where you're finding abortion bans, where the trans issue is particularly hot, et cetera, et cetera. So I worry that that socially liberal, fiscally conservative voter that you and I are both looking for, I worry that that is a minority voter compared to the exact opposite.
That is a fascinating observation and a terrifying one. Um, Friedrich Hayek, who wrote Road to Serfdom, talked about socialists of all parties, and there's a case to that. I'll also put out this, that the reforms that people are expecting under Trump aren't going to happen. Elon's going to come up with some great ideas, and 1/10 of 1% of what he comes up with might happen. It has taken since FDR to build this leviathan of government involved in every aspect of our lives. 4 years of one president is not going to erase it. It's kind of like talking to people about the drug war. This war's been on for 100 years. You think you're going to be able to switch it by making pot and mushrooms legal? No, it is a cultural issue. And there is a cultural thirst to try to solve this, but we value different things so much. I don't see how the culture comes together for any of this.
And that's the challenge of our age, I'm convinced, is how do we adhere? It's not the states of America, it's the United States of America. And how does the California or Colorado voter find some sense of common purpose and common mission with Arkansas or Georgia voter, just to pick a few states? You know what I'm trying to say?
I just can't see how somebody like me who looks at the science and says, there are people with XX chromosomes and people with XY chromosomes. Yeah, there's some odd abnormalities that are something else, but that's the world, compared to somebody who then says, no, there are 38 to 64 genders and you are what you think you are. That person and I we're not going to see eye to eye. And that there was a time when, great, you identify, I'll do what I want to do. But now the cancel culture is so dangerous that people feel threatened, probably in both directions, that I can't speak my mind.
It's a whole separate show, and I'm not sure I really want to go deep on it. But the whole notion of LGBTQAI++, you wonder what if you pull those letters apart, you wonder what some of them have in common with each other. I think there's a whole case to be made, and I've heard some conservative gay commentators make the case that being gay, that the whole trans movement is ultimately a rejection of the gay lesbian movement. So instead of telling kids to embrace their gayness or their gay status or their gay orientation, you're telling them, oh no, you have gender dysphoria.
Leave it at this. I worry that identity politics is destroying the nation.
You and I agree on that, John. We don't agree on everything, but you and I agree on that.
And that growing list of LGBTQIA+, blah, 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 is nothing more than more boxes to separate people and judge them by their differences, by their skin color and their genitals, instead of what brought us together before, which was a shared value of liberty and freedom. We might have difficulties defining it in a satisfactory way, but we all wanted the same thing.
And a shared value of individual agency. And yes, we have not been true to that over the country's history in some very dramatic ways. And yes, it is still a work in progress, but ultimately it still comes down to individual agency and individual liberty, not what group you belong to or are assigned to.
And for me, every time government grows, individual agency, individual sovereignty, by simple physics, diminishes. God, you always make me so happy and cheery when I talk to you.
Yeah, not Mr. Upper here.
All right, very, very last one. Who's our next governor going to be?
If I was in Vegas right now, which I'm
Vegas.
not, I'd say Joe Neguse.
We'll put that down. $20 on the goose.
I'll just say this. Whoever the Democratic nominee is will be the next governor.
On that we agree. Eric, thanks so much.
My pleasure.
If you enjoyed that conversation, by all means, click one of these other great programs. We have the best conversations with the most fascinating Coloradans. And subscribe to our channel. Just click down below and hit that little bell button too. You don't want to miss a single show.